So Gabe, thanks for coming in today. Really appreciate you making the effort, and we're excited to see what you bring to the table and ask you a few questions. We'll go over your background.
Sure.
And then also I'd like to tell you a little bit about the position. So if that's all right with you, we'll get started.
Yeah, really excited to be here, and thanks for having me. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Right, so what I'd like to do is ask you a few questions first of all, see how you respond to those, and we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so let me start with my first question. Tell me a time when you've had a problem with the aircraft, and what did you do to resolve it?
Well, one situation that comes to mind was I was on a cross country during my private pilot's license experience. I was on my long cross country, my 2-hour long one, 250 nautical miles. And on one of my approaches, my flaps didn't go down. So I immediately thought about, what do I need for landing? Do I need flaps? Are they required? And the abbreviation, a tomato flames, from a lot of private pilots' experiences, they know that abbreviation.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we need for landing is not actually flaps. So we don't need those flaps. So I knew I was okay. So I just watched my airspeed, did my communications just like a normal landing, and then just did the procedures to follow through with a landing with no flaps required. So.
Okay, oh good, okay. Yeah. And just for curiosity's sake, how did the landing go?
It greased it, yeah, it was really good.
Right.
Yep.
So you're still here, so obviously it was a good landing.
Right.
All right, so my next question is, how do you determine what is a safe and then more of a dangerous situation? You talk about the flaps, it's probably a good example.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine what's safe and not so safe?
Well, I think that what determines safe and unsafe situations is not only the safety of yourself, the aircraft, but also the passengers on board, the environment around you. I think there's a lot to take into consideration as to what goes into a safe or unsafe decision. So I would say something is, I don't want to say it's minor, but something kind of minor like the flap situation isn't as deadly or dangerous as something, say, as an engine failure or an in-flight fire, which in that case, I think a decision that would be dangerous would be something that would impact everybody, including yourself. But if you were a solo pilot, something that would be drastic. For example, trying to, land in a lake instead of a field, or when the option is obviously there to make a safer decision, make the safer decision, and just always think about the safety of yourself, the aircraft, and other people, and the environment around you, and you should come out with a good decision.
Okay, good. All right, makes sense. A little bit of a different scenario here. So, what would you do if a flight crew member showed up for work and you thought they were either under the influence of alcohol or drugs? They just didn't seem right, and you noticed that. What would your behavior be? What would you do?
The first thing I would do is assess the situation. So I would, come into contact with them and just kind of see how they're acting. If they were acting a little suspicious, for example, like you say, influence under alcohol or drugs, then I would call the people in charge of the scheduling and flight crews and things like that, and either require substitution. I wouldn't inform the passengers. I don't think that would be necessary to inform them. I think they don't need to know as far as that information. I think that's a little sensitive. So I would just inform possibly the passengers of a possible delay, depending on the availabilities of substitute flight attendants or crew members. And then I would, if the situation got too out of hand, I would just cancel the flight or ask the appropriate people to have the flight be canceled. I don't want, anybody getting in trouble or endangered or hurt. So I would just address the situation with the appropriate members of staff, and I would see about a substitution or carrying on without them. And if worse come to worse, I would just cancel the flight and apologize for the inconvenience.
Okay, all right, good. And based on that, would you seek a second opinion of someone else?
I would ask my fellow crew members and my captain and see what they thought of that particular individual and their behavior, and see if it was something that needed to be addressed with members of staff that are higher above or in charge of the crew.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Yeah, all right. Well, my next question for you is, you got a scenario where your captain doesn't understand a clearance that has been given by a traffic control, and he's about to violate a regulation. You try to clarify with him what that clearance was, but you still don't agree. So tell me, what would you do?
I think I would two things. First thing, if it was an instruction given by the air traffic control, I would talk it out with him and ask for, let's clarify with the air traffic controller, as for they're the ones that had the final say in the clearance. So I would talk it through with him, and we would get a reconfirmation from the air traffic control, and then we'd both mutually agree on, hey, it's X, okay. and we would both be able to move forward from there. Right. If it was something regarding paperwork or a flight diagram or a taxiway, something that we could look at on our iPads or our flight plans on paper, I think going to that specific area in the disagreement or the confusion and just making sure that we both had eye contact on that piece of information. For example, if in the clearance they say it's a right turnout, but the captain thinks it's a left turnout, I would show him on the paper, hey, look, it's actually a right turnout. Let's make sure we both can agree on that and physically see it before we move forward incorrectly. So
good. Okay, that's clear. Good. Other than the obvious skills as a pilot, where you have stick and rudder skills, what other qualities you think a good pilot should have?
I think first that comes to mind is leadership, considering you are in the lead of passengers and crew behind you. This could be anywhere from just your mom or dad to 800 people behind you that you don't even know. And I think the leadership and confidence are two things that are really important in a pilot, because operating a machine with a lot of people relying on you to get them from point A to point B safely and smoothly is a lot of responsibility. So I think having confidence to do so and the leadership to be able to carry that that ability to have the skills to operate an airplane to get from point A to point B, I think those are two really good qualities: leadership and responsibility.
And then based on that, if you look back from the day you first started flying to today, what stands out to be the most valuable thing you probably think you've learned so far from flying?
I think one thing that comes to mind is don't be afraid of the aircraft, and no matter what happens, fly the airplane. I think the most time you're gonna have is the most time you're flying until you reach the ground. No matter how you reach the ground, from the point to from when you're in the air to when you're on the ground, that's how much time you have to fly the airplane. So whether it's an in-flight emergency, you need to make an emergency descent, there's heavy winds, things like that. No matter what happens, always fly the airplane and don't give up. And another piece of information that I found really valuable is don't be scared of the aircraft. You own the aircraft. It's only going to do what you tell it to do. And so I think those are two very important things that I've learned from the very beginning when I started flying, and still incorporate those things into my flying today.
Okay. All right. Another situational question for you.
Okay.
So imagine yourself, after a long ground delay, you receive your takeoff clearance from air traffic control. As you line up, you notice that the fuel drops to a few pounds below the minimum for takeoff. You explain this to your captain, but your captain just says, it's only 20 pounds of gas, and continues taxiing for takeoff. What would you do?
I would first possibly run another calculation, make sure that the system is actually correct in what it's saying. Sometimes systems do make errors, as well as humans do. So I would rerun the numbers, make sure that it wasn't a fault in the system and that we're actually good on the takeoff. Right. But if the check came back to be the same, at 20 pounds under the minimum fuel required, I would then halt the aircraft and ask for the controls, and then address the situation to the air traffic control that we are 20 pounds under the minimum takeoff weight, and then we need to make a turn back to our gate for a refueling or a possible maintenance fix. Okay. And then I would talk it out with the captain and not try and use any accusations. Just talk it out as a general situation rather than saying it's his fault or that's on him for continuing. I would say it's probably best if we stop here, go back, assess the situation at a better time, and not continue until we're for sure what the problem is.
Good. Okay. All right. And then moving on to my next question. You notice that your captain and your lead flight attendant aren't really getting along. You've been on a couple of trips now, and you've noticed there's some tension between the two of them. and it's making it difficult for the crew to function together as a team. Is there anything that you feel you could do or you should bring to anyone's attention?
I think, kind of going back to one of the previous questions you asked regarding a flight attendant or crew member under the influence of drugs or alcohol, I think taking it up to a member of staff that's in charge of all that would be appropriate, in terms of just mentioning anonymously that, hey, there's these two people that are, not getting along. It's my captain and the lead flight attendant. It's making it hard for us as a crew to operate and feel stress-free when we're in the aircraft, whether that be on the ground or in the air. And then have them give me their feedback and their opinion as to how to resolve it. I think that I could only go as far as doing that, and I think that addressing it with someone higher up in staff would be appropriate, in terms of maybe, like I mentioned before, a substitution or whatever possible solution that they would have on their end. So
okay. All right. Last couple of questions real quick. What's the best part about flying?
Best part about flying, I think, is the two most exciting parts: the takeoff and landing. I think it requires a lot of focus and a lot of skill. Not saying that the entirety of the flight doesn't, but I think that the takeoff and landing are the most fun parts of flying. Considering now in the day and age we have autopilot, so we tend to revert to that a little more and monitoring the autopilot than actually hand flying throughout the whole entire route. But I think that the physical flying parts are more the takeoff and landing. I think those are a lot of fun. And you always get to see different airports when you're there. When you're up in the sky, you don't see as much on the ground, but I think when you're taking off and landing, you get to experience a lot more of the airport than up in the air. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question, you land, and as you're taxiing back to the gate, ground control tells you to call a phone number.
Sure.
What would you do?
Well, I would call a phone number. I wouldn't really have an option, but I would try and, usually pilots are informed to call phone numbers regarding a problem or an error or regulation that they may have violated. And so I would kind of reassess the flight as a whole and think back to things that could have possibly went wrong or rules that could have been broken. Yeah. And if I couldn't really think of anything, then, I would still call the number regardless. However, if I did think of something that could have been a little iffy or something like that, I would think hard on that situation and what to discuss that's appropriate, and call that phone number and see what the situation is.
So, do you think you're qualified for this position?
I think in terms of hours, I'm at 1,500 hours now, and that's the requirement for airline pilots. So I think that the hours that I've spent in an aircraft are definitely not enough. You can never have enough hours, but I do believe that I am qualified within those hours to become an airline pilot, and not just in terms of flying hours and stick and rudder, but I think that also my qualities of leadership and, like I said, confidence. I think also being very easygoing and friendly and just a team player. I think being part of a crew, just flying the airplane doesn't mean you're not a part of the crew, the flight crew. So I think being a team player and easygoing and friendly, I think it goes a long way. But also the two main characteristics that I say a pilot should have, or a good pilot would have, is leadership and confidence. And I believe that I do carry both of those with me in the aircraft.
And Gabe, from what I've seen today, I've been very impressed by what I've heard, and I would agree with you. I think you'll be a great asset to the airline. So we're going to move to the next step with.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Time.
Yep. Thank you.